There are tons of games that are being developed and programmed every year that we'll never see or get to try. There's a good number of games over the years that have been canceled for one reason or another, and some of these games were really hyped and looked extremely promising, while others never had a drop in media or press release around them, and therefore their loss isn't felt at all. There are many websites and YouTube channels dedicated to finding, documenting, and preserving these lost games. And there's one game in particular that my podcast co-host turned me on to recently, a game called Blaster for the Atari 5200. So I thought it would be fun to play Blaster for the channel, give out all the known information about it, and tell what the game is and how it became, well, unreleased. So let's find out if Blaster would have been a smash hit for the Atari 5200, or if it's a game better left forgotten to time. But first, I just want to remind everybody to leave a like if you enjoy my videos, and subscribe if you haven't already. It helps the channel a ton, and you'll get notifications whenever I upload by clicking that bell icon as well. Alright guys, with that out of the way, let's learn a little bit about the 5200 prototype, Blaster. I think it's an incredible feeling when you come across something that was clearly ahead of its time. When you discover something that, well, you can't believe was made during an era that it was, and you can almost see how it influenced a lot of what came after it. That's part of what makes Blaster so unique to me. Not only was it one of those canceled gems that was nearly lost forever, but it also attempts to be many things and has so many incredible ideas that wouldn't be perfected or tried for another 10, 20, or even 30 years later in the video game industry. And that, along with the fact that it was unreleased, is why I knew I had to make a video on Blaster. This game should not be forgotten, and I'm going to do my part in making sure that, well, that doesn't happen. According to AtariAge, Blaster was developed back in 1983 and 1984 by Atari, and was set to be released on the Atari 5200. But here is one of the most interesting parts. Blaster was originally written for the Atari 400 and 800, but was later adapted for the 5200. Now I find that interesting, especially given that those platforms were, well, basically the same. The game was canceled, but not before being shown to Williams, who adapted it into an obscure and, well, frankly, unsuccessful arcade game under the same name. Less than 500 of those arcade cabinets were produced, and the game was, well, once again forgotten to time. That is until 2004, when Matt Reckart, I'm sorry I butchered your name, but anyway, until Matt of Atari Protos found the prototype and released it to be played on emulators. This is incredible information that I just gave out, as this is one of the rare cases where a game started on computers, then moved to an admittedly similar designed console, and finally found its way to the arcades. This makes the arcade version the port. Crazy. And the arcade was the sole release. The console and computer ports were never meant to see the light of day, and it's only thanks to Matt and Atari Protos that we're able to play it. Everything about Blaster to this point is infinitely interesting to me, and it keeps getting better because apparently, according to AtariProtos.com, this game is a spiritual sequel to Robotron 2084. Yes, this vector, wireframe 3D experience is somehow tied to the twin-stick shooter Robotron, which is one of my favorites in its genre. Just incredible. I couldn't find any more information on how the two are linked, but if this is true, then it's probably one of the earliest examples of a game completely switching genres in a massive way, between the prequel and sequel. Or maybe I'm getting a little too excitable about the whole thing. It is a spiritual successor after all. Regardless, the history of Blaster is a great thing to learn about, and I encourage everybody to dig deeper. I'll have links in the description to help get you started. But I think it's time to take a look at the game itself. Blaster, as I said before, is a sort of 3D shooter, and this was, well, extremely ambitious for 1983 and 84. But what's more ambitious is the multiple different gameplay styles and levels that Blaster attempts. I want to break down each and explain why this game was so far ahead of its time, at least in my eyes. You start the game in the robot grid, and this is probably the only thing you could argue that has Robotron 2084 connections. You play in a spaceship cockpit through the whole game, and you're flying through the land of this planet shooting, well, robots. But you're also flying through archways and avoiding enemy fire and obstacles. This game moves pretty fast at points, especially when moving up and down, but it's painstakingly slow to move left or right for some reason. You shoot at the enemies to earn as many points as possible. The first stage looks incredible, but I couldn't believe how close this game is to the SNES classic Star Fox. It just feels like an early version of that game. Like if you told me this was a crude mock-up of Star Fox in its very early stages, I think I'd believe you. This part of Blaster is fun. It's definitely interesting and challenging. And each time you return to the robot grid, it gets more and more intense as the robots take aim and start blasting at you more frequently. It's really well done, and it's just incredible what the developers achieved here on the 5200, at least if you ask me. And the arcade version runs a lot better and looks even more like Star Fox in my opinion. Let me know what you think about the robot stage, and if the robots themselves are connected to Robotron. But anyway, we have to move on next to the time tunnel. And this is where the game reminds me of Gorf a little bit, as well as the bonus ring stage from Tempest 2000. It plays so well, and is far more challenging than you might think, as your objectives slide around the edges and the center of the play area. Your whole mission here is to save these astronauts and the people as they slide through time. They scream help and their whole bodies become the words, and then they take shape as people and fly quickly at you. And believe it or not, I felt bad when I missed them and couldn't save them. It's terrifying to think that these people are now lost to space and time, and I could have saved them had I been quicker. Well again, Blaster is far ahead of its time here, while also paying homage to Gorf. And this is something we'll see a better example of here shortly. Next, you have the Outer Space stage, and this reminds me of the TIE Fighter portion of the Star Wars arcade game. Ships fly in front of you, away from you, and towards you while blasting their rectangular shots in your face. This is probably the most straightforward and basic part of the game, but there is a variety of enemies to contend with here. It's similar to the Robot Grid in some ways, but it's pulled off nicely, and it has the same movement issues as the Robot Grid too, but it's still a ton of fun. Then last but not least, we have what they call the Planetoid section. The game always follows the cycle of Robot Grid, Time Tunnel, Outer Space, and then Planetoids before setting to the beginning for a new level. So Planetoids, well, it almost has this escape feeling to it, like you're attempting to reach the next planet by using hyperspace while avoiding the asteroids. And that's exactly what I think of in playing this portion of Blaster. Asteroids. It feels like a first-person version of that game. And even the space rocks themselves resemble the 2600 version of the asteroids in the game Asteroids. And I'm saying asteroids a lot. The game seems to indicate that you're running low on energy at this point, and you have elements of the time tunnel in that there will be people to once again rescue. But you also have to grab the E in a similar fashion to the people. And when you see it, you'll want to fly into it, and, well, that's it. The screens and obstacles start flying by at impossible speeds, and the game cycles back to the beginning and the Robot Grid, and you must do it all over again, getting the highest score possible. Whether you're playing the cancelled 5200 original via a ROM from a Google search, or the Williams arcade port on MAME, I have to say that Blaster is extremely fun. There's no doubting that the arcade version looks and plays better, but both are worth checking out. The game plays well, and I think it should be finally remembered today, in a similar vein to titles like Rescue on Fractalus. It's early 3D done right, and, well, it's worth remembering. I saw a few physical copies on Mercari and Etsy for $250 for Atari 5200 versions of the game. These are reproduction cartridges, and you can easily find the ROM online. And for half of what you would pay just for this cartridge, you could get an awesome 5200 flash cart, which is also the same one I used to play this 5200 version of this game for the channel. So I encourage you to go that route. I think you'll be much more satisfied. While there are physical versions of this game, well, $250 is a tall ask. But Blaster is worth playing, just not worth giving your firstborn child to do so. But that's everything I found out and know about Blaster for the 5200 and its port to the arcade. But now I want to hear from all of you. Do you think Blaster is impressive? Do you think it would have helped the 5200 had it been released? Have you played this unreleased title? And if so, do you think it's good or bad? Let me know about all this and so much more in the comments down below. I'd also like to end by thanking these following classy Atarians for supporting this YouTube channel. Thanks to them, we can cover things like Blaster, as well as replace and upgrade equipment and more. You can support us too with a YouTube membership or by heading over to patreon.com/7800progamer. Thanks again, guys. You all rock. But with that, it's time to wrap up this look at the best 5200 game that most people have never played. I've been the 7800 Pro Gamer, a man who didn't see a release on the 5200 either, but instead came out in the arcades known as the Atari Network. And I'd like to thank you all for watching. And as always, remember to stay classy, Atarians.